simultaneous. See, because from the very beginning, the United States was really, in some ways, much more tied to gold and resources and land. And so this very crucial democratic experiment is predicated on the monstrous crime against indigenous peoples that we've never come to terms with. So you get a lot of neoliberal chatter about America's original sin is slavery. That's a lie. The original sin was we had to decide whether we were going to coexist with indigenous peoples or dominate them. And the decision was, for the most part, genocidal effect in terms of domination. So it's a settler colonial society, a colony of Britain, you see. Then we enslaved the Africans, who become the basis of our economy. And the vast majority of profits made were actually tied to slavery. That's why so many of the first presidents in America were slaveholders, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court were slaveholders, and so forth. That doesn't mean that certain democratic practices were not being enacted, but it was enacted for white brothers with property. The white brothers who had no property, they couldn't vote at all. The women, of course, couldn't vote until 1920. So they had domestic households in which they had to find some sense of fulfillment. That's what history of patriarchy and misogyny, in part, are connected. And then tremendous efforts come to expanding it. Expanding it. And this is why even when Brother Trump talks about socialism, see, he doesn't realize the Pledge of Allegiance was written by Francis Bellamy, who was a socialist. The song American the Beautiful, which is one of the most beautiful songs. Ray Charles sang that song and take you to a different place. I mean, he's seeing things that we can't see, and you know he's blind. You know what I mean? America the Beautiful. Yes. Elizabeth Lee Bates, socialist. Professor Wellesley. Who was our greatest poet? Walt Whitman. Deep ties to socialism. Who was our greatest philosopher? John Dewey. Democratic socialist his whole life. Helen Keller, deaf, mute, blind, graduate of Radcliffe, socialist. Reinhold Niebuhr, the greatest Christian thinker of the 20th century. Democratic socialist, moral man in a moral society. Martin Luther King Jr., democratic socialist. Ella Baker, democratic socialism is as American as apple pie. But with the communists, and the communist threat, and the Soviet Union and all of its repression and regimentation and violation of liberties and killing of the kulaks and so forth, in the American mind, socialism becomes associated with communism. And so you saw Brother Lindsay the other day, right?
Yes.
He looked like a cartoonist version of Joseph McCarthy. They're all communists. They're all communists. And you see, what happens is in the neo-fascist discourse, it's true anywhere around the world. If you can define a community as pure and then characterize those on the outside who are threatening as impure, and then view yourself as those coming to the rescue to preserve